Hey guys, some short and sweet notes today over the different types of powers that are mentioned in the Constitution and that are kind of exist in our government today. These are all four vocab terms, so you've seen these words before, but I do want to go a little bit more in depth today to make sure you fully understand the differences and maybe the shared similarities between these terms. Okay, so first off, we have reserved powers, and these are powers that are not given to the federal government in the Constitution if they belong to the states. Okay, powers reserved for the states. So you see the word reserved powers, that should trigger in your mind, okay, that means a power that belongs to the state governments and not the federal government. And they're not listed in the Constitution because the Constitution really talks about the powers granted to the federal government, not the state governments. Okay. The 10th Amendment is a really good example of this because it talks about how all those powers that are not listed in the Constitution are reserved for the states and to the people. Okay, some good examples of the reserved powers. Requirements for driver's licenses. That's why, like Kansas, you can be driving your permit. You can have your permit by age 14. You can be a driver's license. You have an actual full license by age 15 in Kansas. It's a little bit different in Missouri, obviously, because you live here. 15 for permit, 16 for license. Requirements for teacher certifications. Okay, so different states require different levels of education, different tests that you have to pass in order to be a teacher in that state. Establish schools and graduation requirements. Yep, every state has a little bit different graduation requirements for their high school students. Okay, conduct elections. So all the states determine how their elections are going to go, whether or not they're going to have caucuses or primaries, what system they're going to use to count the votes, all that stuff. That's controlled by the state governments. And then lastly, a good example is to provide fire and police protection. Those are provided by the state, not the national government. Okay. Next, we have express powers, and these are the opposite of reserved, in that these are powers given to the federal government by the Constitution. They are written there. They are explicitly written in the Constitution. Okay. Article 1, Section 8 is a really good example of express powers because Article 1, Section 8 lists all the express powers that the legislative branch has, all the powers that Congress has in the federal government. Okay. You might also see these referred to as enumerated powers or delegated powers. It means the exact same thing. Powers that are given to the national government by the Constitution. They are written there. Okay. Some really good examples of that. Declare war. Obviously, the state governments can't do that. The national government can. Coin money. Yep. All 50 states are on the same American dollar system. Establish the postal system. That's where you have UPS or USPS. Wow. United States Postal Service. Yes. Protect copyrights and patents. Regulate interstate commerce and foreign trade. That's a federal government's job. Establish foreign relations with other countries. That's not a state's job. That's a federal government's job. These are all examples of expressed powers of the federal government. Okay. Next up, we have implied powers, and there's a lot written here, I know, and that's because these are probably the trickiest to understand because they are powers that are granted to the federal government, but they are not written in the Constitution. They are based entirely off this one section in Article 1, Section 8. It's Clause 18. If you were to go to your copy of the Constitution, you could see that it says, Congress has the power to make all laws which are necessary and proper for carrying out the execution of their express powers. Okay, so we call that the necessary and proper clause. Basically, it's saying Congress has all these powers and then also more powers to make different types of laws, even types of laws that aren't really listed here and wouldn't cover any of these things. Okay, so it's called the elastic clause as well, aka the elastic clause, because it gives Congress more powers. Like you wearing an elastic waist sweatpants, you can kind of grow into them. If you get a little bit bigger, you still have that wiggle room because this basically gives the federal government wiggle room to increase its powers. Okay, so it gives Congress more powers than those that are explicitly written in the Constitution, but they're not limitless power. Okay, so here's a really good example of an implied power. Congress has the implied power to draft U.S. citizens into the Army because it's necessary and proper to carry out its express power of setting up, funding, and regulating the armed services. So that last part is an express power of Congress. But they also, based off of that express power, also have the power to draft U.S. citizens into the Army. That is their implied power. It doesn't say anything about drafting people into an army in the Constitution, but They have that power because it's based off of their express power of setting up, funding, and regulating an armed services. Kind of weird. There's some really good implied powers examples on the second page of your notes that you're filling out right now as well. Okay, so if you need to scroll down there and look at some of those, there's some good stuff there. Okay, lastly, we have concurrent powers, powers that are shared between the federal level and the state level of government. The way I remember this is there's two R's in concurrent. I think that, okay, that one represents the federal, one represents the state. These are shared powers, concurrent shared powers between the federal and state levels of government. Powers that are not really exclusive to just one state government or one federal government, but they are shared between the federal and state governments themselves. Okay, power to collect taxes, build roads, establish correctional facilities like prisons, establish public safety agencies. There's some really good examples on this page too. Collect taxes. I think I already said that already, but anyway, the state government taxes you and the federal government taxes you. Maintain, regulate roads, maintain law and order. You have state police and you have federal police, the FBI, things like that. So those are some shared responsibilities, some shared powers between the state and federal government. And that's it for today. Just wanted to recap those 4 words for you so you really understand those differences between those terms.